Clint Eastwood rode in silence along the long roads of Nebraska, just looking for a moment of peace. But everything changed when he spotted something unusual: a boy alone, pedaling in fear. That simple sight would start an intense plot, full of challenges and surprises. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified whenever there are new stories on the channel. Clint Eastwood was behind the wheel of his old Ford F-100 pickup truck, driving along the long, flat roads that surrounded Lincoln in the state of Nebraska. The sun was already setting on the horizon, staining the sky with orange hues, when he decided to take a shortcut along a back road. He needed some peace and quiet after taking part in a charity initiative in the city, something that had always been part of his routine, supporting social projects and solidarity actions in different parts of the country. His discreet, quiet, but firm manner was already known to many. For Clint, it wasn't about fame, but about doing his bit. As he drove, he remembered the conversations at the event. Mothers worried about violence in the neighborhood, fathers anxious about their children's safety. Despite decades of experience in the film industry and his worldwide fame, Clint carried with him a deep sense of responsibility towards the people around him. He always believed that small acts of kindness can change the course of a life. The road was almost deserted that late afternoon. It was hot, but the wind coming through the ajar window brought some relief. Then, in the distance, Clint noticed something that caught his eye. A small silhouette, pedaling a bicycle with some difficulty. As he got closer, he realized it was a boy. He was alone, slumped over, wearing a battered cap and a grimy backpack. This gave Clint an immediate feeling of unease. He pulled the truck over to the side of the road, very slowly, so as not to frighten the boy. When he got out, he got a closer look at his tense face, as if he was carrying a silent fear. "Hey kid, what's up?" Clint said, raising one of his hands in a sign of peace. The boy stopped his bike and looked at him hesitantly. He had green eyes and simple, possibly worn clothes. Who are you?" he asked, his voice shaking a little. "I'm Clint Eastwood, but you don't have to worry about that. I just want to know if you're all right. It's late for you to be walking around here alone." The boy looked away, scratching his fist nervously. Clint noticed the scratches on his knee and the cold sweat running down his forehead. The little boy opened and closed his mouth a few times before speaking. "My name is Ethan Parker. I didn't mean to disturb you." Clint took a deep breath. If the boy didn't look seriously injured, why was he so distressed? "It's all right, Ethan. You're not bothering me. Did something happen?" Ethan swallowed. His eyes watered, but he seemed to be holding back tears. He glanced towards the roadside and then back, as if he feared that someone would suddenly appear. "I don't know if I can tell you." Clint took a step forward, but kept a respectful distance. "Believe me, you can trust me. How about we talk inside the truck? It's air-conditioned. I'm sure it'll be better than staying in this infernal heat." The boy agreed with a slight nod. Clint took the bike and put it in the bed. Then they both got into the vehicle. The simple interior of the old Ford offered a temporary refuge. Clint turned the air conditioning onto the lowest setting to relieve the stuffy climate. "There, now we're more comfortable. Are you going to tell me what's going on, Ethan?" The boy held his cap, turning it over in his hands. His eyes kept darting around. I was going home, but a black car pulled up behind. The man driving said I should get in, that he had something important to show me. I didn't want to. I tried to run away." Clint felt his stomach turn. Children walking alone on deserted roads are easy targets for malicious individuals. "Did he try to take you by force?" Ethan nodded, his voice fading a little. "He opened the door and almost grabbed my arm. I pedaled as fast as I could. I think he followed me for a while, but then he disappeared." Clint looked at the empty road outside, the sky beginning to darken. There were no cars in sight at the time, but the boy's fear made it clear that there was still danger. "Have you told your mother? Your father?" Ethan shook his head in denial. "My mother is at work. She leaves early in the morning and doesn't come back until late at night. She works overtime in the cafeteria to pay the bills. I don't have a father." His voice weakened. revealing a mixture of sadness and resignation. "I was going to my grandmother's, but she lives far away." Clint clenched his jaw. The memory of some difficult times in his life made him even more sensitive to the boy's situation. "Well, it's not safe for you to be alone. I'm going to take you somewhere where we can call your mother or grandmother, okay?" Ethan, still frightened, agreed. Clint started the engine, returned to the road, and drove cautiously. As they drove along, he tried to keep the boy calm. He talked about old movies, told little stories about places he'd visited, always in a low, serene tone. Even so, he couldn't get the idea out of his head that the black car might still be around. After a few minutes, they arrived at a modest gas station, one of those with a convenience store. Clint parked and turned off the engine. "Let's go in. I'll buy you a soda and we'll see what we can do." Ethan followed him, visibly more relaxed now that he was close to an adult he trusted. The convenience store was almost empty, except for a middle-aged clerk, who cast curious glances as she wiped down the counter. Clint took 2 cans of soda from the fridge and let Ethan choose something to eat. As they approached the cashier, the attendant greeted them. "Good afternoon. Can I help you with anything else?" Clint placed the items on the counter. "That's all, thank you. And do you happen to know if there's a public phone around here or Wi-Fi available?" "My cell phone isn't getting a good signal." The attendant, whose badge read Debbie, gave a slight smile. "There's a phone in the corner, but I don't know if it's working properly. People have complained about it recently." After paying, Clint led Ethan to the payphone in a forgotten corner of the store. The boy typed in his grandmother's number, but nothing happened. The handset really did seem to be broken. "I'll try my cell phone again." Clint held up the smartphone, taking a few steps towards the glass door. "Maybe I'll pick it up outside." When Clint went outside to test the signal, he noticed a strange movement outside. A black car drove past slowly, as if spying on him. Instantly, he remembered what Ethan had told him. The vehicle didn't stop and drove on, but it left Clint with the certainty that this driver was searching the place, perhaps looking for the boy. Ethan came out of the store and stopped next to him. "It's the same car, isn't it?" whispered the boy, tense. "It must be..." Clint pressed his lips together. He didn't want to alarm the boy, but he needed to keep reality clear. "I don't know, son. It could be. Let's keep an eye out." He dialed the number again, now with his cell phone. This time it worked. He quickly spoke to Ethan's grandmother, who answered worriedly. "Mrs. Parker, I'm with your grandson Ethan. He's fine, but we need to make sure he's safe. Where do you live? We can take him there." The elderly voice on the other end of the line sounded relieved and distressed at the same time. "I live in a trailer park near exit 47 at the end of Old Creek Road. Can you bring him in? My daughter works late," Clint confirmed. As soon as he hung up, he looked at Ethan. "We're going to take you to your grandmother's. Stay close to me, okay?" Ethan agreed, holding the can of soda tightly. There was something in that gesture that broke Clint's heart. A mixture of fear and blind trust. And Clint didn't intend to let him down. They got back into the truck, but before leaving, Clint decided to call the local police and report the attempted kidnapping. He spoke to the receptionist at the police station, who promised to send a vehicle to investigate the situation. He didn't know if it would arrive quickly, but it didn't hurt to try. The journey continued in silence for a few minutes. Ethan, in the passenger seat, looked out of the window apprehensively. It was almost dark, and the streetlights were dimming as they got further away from the city. Clint glanced in the rearview mirror from time to time, trying to spot a suspicious car. "Do you like going to school, Ethan?" Clint asked, trying to distract the boy. "Yes, I do, especially math. But..." He took a deep breath. "There are some classmates who make fun of me. I don't have many nice clothes, and they make fun of my old backpack." Clint nodded sympathetically. "I'm sorry they do that. When I was younger, I went through some hard times too." The important thing is to stay focused and remember, everyone has their own story, and none of that defines who you really are. Ethan seemed to reflect. I think it does, but it's hard sometimes. Clint remembered how, even after achieving fame, he continued to face judgments and veiled prejudices. The world can be cruel, no matter how old you are. The important thing is to have the courage to keep going. When they were not far from the trailer park, Clint noticed a car coming up behind them. Keeping a steady distance, he tightened his pace. "Ethan, keep an eye out. I think we're being followed." The boy slumped in his seat. "Is that the same black car?" Clint didn't want to lie. "Maybe it is, but don't worry. We'll get to your grandmother's right away and sort this out." He then took a detour down a narrow street, trying to throw off his supposed pursuer. The truck wobbled over the potholes and uneven terrain. Looking in the rearview mirror, he noticed that the black car had slowed down, but was still in his line of sight. Clint's heart raced. He had to protect the boy. "I'm going to stop at the house of an old friend of mine," Clint decided suddenly, turning the steering wheel down another alley. "He lives near here. He's a guy I trust. Maybe he can help us call the police again or get an escort." Ethan accepted the idea without question. Any plan that kept him away from the suspicious man sounded good. In a few minutes, Clint arrived at a simple house, surrounded by a small yard owned by Dave Wilson, his friend. The screen door squeaked when he knocked. Who answered was a man with a closed expression. He had short brown hair and was wearing a plaid shirt. He smiled when he recognized Clint. "Clint Eastwood. Long time, old boy. Come in, come in." He noticed Ethan standing next to him. "Who's the boy? Are you all right?" "Hi, Dave. This is Ethan. We're having a serious problem. A man in a black car is chasing the boy and tried to take him by force." Dave got serious right away. "Come in quick. I'll call my cousin. He works at the police station nearby." They entered the modest room with old furniture and a tube TV still on with the local channel. Clint signaled Ethan to sit down on the sofa. The boy seemed to be sweating with nervousness. Dave picked up the phone and dialed, while Clint kept an eye on the window, hoping to see a car drive by. "Clark, this is Dave Wilson. Man, I need some help. I've got Clint Eastwood and a kid called Ethan here. The boy was almost kidnapped, and I think they're still after him. Can you send someone to patrol the area?" On the other side, Dave's cousin, Officer Clark Wilson, said he'd be there as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Ethan finally burst into tears. Unable to contain the tension that had built up, Clint knelt down beside him. "It's okay, son. Cry. Let it out. You've been very brave so far." Dave, who had already hung up the phone, approached with a glass of water. "Here, big boy. Have some." Ethan drank the water in shaky sips. "Thank you." "I'm sorry, Mr. Clint. I'm a little scared." "No need to apologize, Ethan." Clint spoke in a calm voice, even though his chest felt tight. "You're reacting to danger. Anyone would be like that." They sat in silence for a few minutes, just listening to the muffled sound of the TV and taking deep breaths to relieve the tension. That's when Dave pulled back the curtain on the window and let out a restrained exclamation. "Clint, the black car is stopped outside." Clint stood up in a flash. He peeked through the crack and confirmed it. A dark sedan with tinted windows was driving down the street without turning on its headlights. "Damn, it looks like the guy really is watching us." Ethan paled and curled up on the sofa. "He's going to get me." Clint frowned, determined. "No, he won't. Stay inside with Dave. I'll go outside and take a closer look." "Are you crazy, Clint?" Dave reacted immediately. "What if the guy is armed?" Clint thought for 2 seconds before answering, as if weighing up the risks. "The police are on their way. I'm not going to approach the car. I just want to see if I can get the license plate or something we can pass on to them." Dave reluctantly agreed, but insisted on accompanying Clint to the balcony. The sun had completely disappeared. The night was lit only by a weak street lamp on the corner. The black car remained motionless for a few moments, But when Clint and Dave took 2 steps out, the driver started the engine and sped off, disappearing into the darkness. "Coward," Dave muttered. Clint breathed a sigh of relief on the one hand, but worried on the other. At least there was no confrontation, but it's clear that this guy isn't willing to give up. They went back inside. Ethan was still sitting on a cushion, his eyes full of uncertainty. "Has he left?" "For now, yes," said Dave, closing the door. 10 minutes later, they finally heard the sound of sirens in the distance. A police car arrived, and out stepped Officer Clark Wilson, a stocky man with a frank expression, and his partner in uniform, Officer Mitchell, a woman with hard features but a compassionate gaze. "Dave, where are you?" Clark called out, and Dave invited them in. Inside, Clint explained the whole situation: the appearance of the car, the attempted kidnapping, Ethan's fear, the chase to Dave's house. The officers recorded every detail. "Any description of the driver?" asked Officer Mitchell, jotting it down on her notepad. Ethan mentioned that it was a man wearing a cap, but we couldn't see his face, only that he had sunglasses on. Clint replied, looking at the boy, who nodded. Clark scratched his beard. "I've had sporadic reports of a black car approaching children in other neighborhoods, but nothing concrete yet. We'll reinforce the patrol, and we'd better get the boy to his grandmother's house as soon as possible, with a police escort." With this agreement in place, everyone left the house. Clark and Mitchell went in the car, and Clint drove his old F-100. Dave stayed, as he needed to look after his own family. The drive to the trailer park was relatively quiet, with no sign of pursuit. When they arrived, Ethan's grandmother, Mrs. Doris Parker, was already waiting outside with an anxious expression and her white hair tied up in a simple bun. "Ethan!" she exclaimed, running to hug her grandson as soon as he got out of the truck. The boy clung to her, relieved. Doris looked up at Clint and the policeman. Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough," Clint smiled, gently squeezing the lady's shoulder. "I did what any decent person would do, but you'd better keep Ethan safe and, if you can, keep an eye out for strange movements in the neighborhood." Officer Mitchell added, "If possible, also, ask your daughter, Ethan's mother, to go to the police station and file a formal police report. The more details we have, the better." Doris nodded, touched. "I'll talk to her as soon as I get home from work." Ethan, his eyes still red from crying, approached Clint. "Thank you, Mr. Clint. If it hadn't been for you." Clint, who had always had a reputation for being tough, couldn't hide the tender look on his face when he saw the boy's gratitude. "You were very brave, Ethan. It's good to remember that we should never be ashamed to ask for help when we need it." When everything finally seemed to be moving towards a peaceful conclusion, an engine noise caught everyone's attention. The same black car passed down the street, as if it were prowling the area. The police officers immediately got into their cars and moved forward to follow it, turning on their lights. The black vehicle took off and disappeared around a bend. A brief chase began. In the trailer park, in the dim moonlight, Clint and Doris exchanged distressed glances. Ethan was scared again. "Calm down, my son. The police will sort it out," said his grandmother, stroking his hair. Clint felt a wave of indignation. "You know, Doris, I didn't want to get so involved, but you can't ignore a situation like this. This man could threaten other children." Doris sighed, the wrinkles deepening on her face. "Unfortunately, we've seen terrible things happen here. There are people who think this place is worthless and that children like Ethan have no one to care." Clint clenched his fists. "That's where they're wrong." That night, the police failed to catch the driver of the black car. He escaped, taking advantage of the darkness and the narrow streets. However, Clint's account and Ethan's testimony prompted a more in-depth investigation. In the following days, the story hit the local news, and the presence of Clint Eastwood acting as an unexpected protector attracted a lot of attention. Interviews, reports, and discussions on radio and in newspapers highlighted the importance of reporting any signs of crime against children. Clint, who didn't like to exploit his fame in a sensationalist way, realized that this was the kind of exposure that was worthwhile. Together with Ethan's grandmother, he began to help organize community meetings to educate residents about child safety. Local schools were involved, and police officers gave talks on how to react to suspicious approaches. Entire families showed up to share fears, experiences, and also to create mutual protection strategies. At each meeting, Ethan stood next to Clint and Doris, still a little shy, but clearly more confident. At one of these events, held in the gymnasium of a public school, the boy took to the stage, held the microphone and, with a trembling voice, recounted what he had experienced. I thought there was no one there for me, and suddenly Mr. Clint appeared. So I want to say to everyone here, never give up asking for help. There's always someone who cares. The clapping echoed around the gym. Some people cried at the sight of such a young and fragile child standing up against fear. Clint was quietly moved, remembering times when he himself had doubted the people around him, but discovered the strength of a united community. In the following weeks, the local police raided suspicious areas. Other reports came in. A neighbor reported seeing a man in a cap and sunglasses offering a ride to a group of children near a park. The partial license plate of the car matched that of the vehicle spotted by Clint and Dave. Although the suspect had not yet been apprehended, the siege was closing in. All this had an unexpected effect. Families who hadn't spoken to each other before began to exchange information, talk more, and look out for each other. Ethan's mother, Lauren Parker, was thrilled to realize that she was no longer alone in raising her son. Even though she was exhausted from the diner, she attended meetings, discussed neighborhood watch proposals, and, above all, paid more attention to conversations with Ethan about safety and trust. One afternoon, leaving work earlier than usual, Lauren met Clint and Ethan in a small community hall, where they were handing out leaflets warning about strangers approaching children. She approached them, shyly. "Mr. Eastwood." Clint turned, seeing the young woman with clear eyes that resembled Ethan's. "Miss Parker, how do you do?" She smiled, embarrassed. "I wanted to thank you personally. Ethan keeps telling me how you helped him to keep his nerve. I know it's not easy to deal with his routine and these dangers, but thanks to you and my mother, I now see that I don't have to face everything alone." Clint shrugged, with his usual modesty. "I'm glad things are getting better. Ethan is a strong boy. He just needed someone to believe that." Lauren wiped away a stubborn tear. "Thank you, really." The mood in the city had changed a lot. Fear still existed, as the criminal was still at large, but the unity of the people made every street, every block, less vulnerable. Until one night, Clint received an unexpected phone call from Dave Wilson. "Clint, they found the black car. An officer on patrol spotted the vehicle near an abandoned condominium. They're surrounding it right now." Clint felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Finally, "I hope they can catch this guy for good." Dave agreed. "So do I. I'll let you know." Over the next few hours, the news came through. The police raided the site and arrested a man with the same characteristics as Ethan and other witnesses. Inside the car, objects were found that clearly indicated the intention to kidnap children. Official confirmation came the following day. He was the criminal responsible for several kidnapping attempts in the region. He had a criminal record and had recently moved to Lincoln, planning to act where he believed he would go unnoticed. News of the capture spread quickly. In the same gymnasium where the community meetings were held, a gathering was organized to celebrate the regained security. Representatives from the town hall, police officers, families, and volunteers gathered. Clint was invited to say a few words. In front of a cheering audience, he took a deep breath and began. "We never know what we will find on a deserted road, nor the pain that each person carries within them. But when we choose to stop and help instead of moving on, something extraordinary happens. We discover the strength of a community that pulls together despite fear and differences." He looked at Ethan in the front row, next to Doris and Lauren. "Ethan taught me that there is no age for courage. Sometimes you just need someone to look you in the eye and say, 'You're not alone.' And that's a message that everyone here has understood." Always look out for each other." The round of applause was overwhelming. Over the next few days, Ethan and his mother's lives returned to a less tense routine, and they no longer felt isolated. They exchanged greetings with neighbors who previously hadn't even known their names. The old trailer park was now a place where there was less prejudice and more togetherness. Ethan's grandmother, always smiling, made a point of telling everyone how her grandson had overcome a trauma and become a kind of spokesperson for hope in the neighborhood. Clint, for his part, stayed in Lincoln for a while longer, helping out with community activities, taking part in meetings at schools, talking about the importance of looking around. And when it was finally time to leave for his next stop, his life was made up of constant comings and goings. He received a warm farewell from the residents, with whom he had formed strong bonds. On the afternoon of his farewell, Clint paid one last visit to the trailer park. He found Ethan kicking a ball around in the small courtyard, and Lauren working in a flower bed which, despite the arid soil, was standing firm. "Mr. Clint!" exclaimed the boy, running to hug him. "I've come to say goodbye, Ethan. It's time for me to go." Ethan bowed his head, trying to disguise his sadness. "But will you come back one day?" Clint put his hand on his shoulder. "Life is full of roads, kid. Who knows? All I know is that I'll take everything I've learned here with me." Lauren approached, wiping her hands on her jeans. "I want you to know that we'll never forget what you did for us." Clint smiled, letting out a breath like someone who gets emotional without wanting to show it. "I only did what had to be done." Then, with one last handshake for Lauren and a warm hug for Ethan, he returned to the old F-100. He set off down that back road that had initially brought him there, leaving behind a neighborhood that, although simple, had shown him the transformative power of empathy and collective courage. Sometime later, Lincoln maintained the climate of collaboration that had been established after the kidnappers' capture. Neighborhood safety meetings became a monthly tradition. Parents volunteered to monitor school exits, and the children grew up feeling that while the world can be dangerous, it can also be welcoming when people care about each other. Ethan became actively involved in community projects, giving advice to other boys and girls about facing fear and asking for help. His grandmother, Doris, was proud to see her grandson mature in such a positive way. Lauren got a new job, less exhausting and better paid, which allowed her more time with her son. The stories about Clint Eastwood helping that little boy on. That special day continued to be told from generation to generation, not just as a tale about a movie star who happened to stumble across a boy in distress, but as proof that an act of kindness can start a chain of solidarity, overcoming prejudices, judgments, and insecurities. Because at the end of the day, the biggest lesson was that compassion and respect can flourish in the most unlikely places, as long as people are willing to stop, listen, and reach out, just as Clint did on the side of that dusty road, and that when someone decides to act for good, hope is renewed, and courage arises even in the youngest or most jaded hearts. Because true overcoming is ageless, and everyone can make a difference if they choose empathy.